Well, hello, everybody. Here we are once again. This is Rob and I's 4-year anniversary
That's right.
of being at the Cannes Lions, Festival of Creativity. It is 2025. We are at Stagwell Sport Beach. My name is Gina Gray. I am with Call McVoy, which is a full-service creative agency out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Rob, say hello and tell everybody who you are.
Cool. Thank you so much, Gina. Super happy to be here with you again.
My favorite part. My favorite part.
Absolutely, best part of the year. My summer is marked by having a session with you. So thanks for this. So my name is Rob. I am the VP of Global Brand and Creative at Epidemic Sound. And actually this year we are the official soundtrack of Sport Beach. So that's
I
fun
love
too.
it.
Yeah,
so we're going to be talking all things sound today. So a fun question to get us started. If you could bring any noisemaker to a sporting event, what's your favorite noisemaker?
Oh, it's got to be we covered this last time, but cycling is my
I
jam.
know. I remember that.
I'm a huge fan of cycling. So the little bells, it's like I guess they live on sheep, maybe.
Okay.
And they make a particular sound, and that sound instantly for me is cycling. And so I love that.
Love it.
And it's kind of cool because it's not too obnoxious. It's not like a whistle, which is going to completely annihilate your eardrums. It's actually a fun noise. And so, but it's also, it's cycling heritage.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. And we're very Scandinavian, so we've got the big, the Vikings horn. So
Love
that's,
it.
it's...
Yeah.
Okay, so first question. So at Comic Boy, we actually helped one of our clients, Purdue Farms Chicken, with their first sonic branding exercise.
Congrats.
And really, the team confessed that as part of their journey, it was there was a whole potential path of different tracks and stuff like that we could use. A lot of pathways in. And what was really interesting is what we actually thought didn't necessarily resonate as much with consumers as we were going through the whole testing process. So my question for you is, a lot of brands are still rookies when it comes to sound strategies. What do you think is the number one thing that brands need to consider when they think about the overall role of sound in their marketing?
Yeah, this is something which we come up against again and again and again. We're not up against, right? This is an exciting opportunity, but I think it's perhaps one of the more misunderstood sides of brand strategy or brand identity. It probably boils down to simple things like we all have an opinion of music, and it's very hard to escape. Music is such a fundamental part of all of our lives. I think that some people are excited by the aesthetic arts of art and so forth, and they'll go to museums and they might have a side interest in design. But everyone has an opinion about music, every single person. And so it's very hard to decouple what your own taste is from that which is a good representation of what your brand is. And so it does create a bit of dissonance in our brains, and we have to listen to a piece of music and try to understand whether it's a true representation of our brand. And I think perhaps that's one of the critical mistakes that people make, is that when trying to assess what their brand sound is, one, they miss the strategic side, which is again quite hard to define because it uses language that not a lot of us are familiar with. But then, secondly, we will often listen to the music without it being paired with something which is a representation of our brand. And I see this again and again, and I do it myself when I'm trying to find some music for a piece of content which is a representation of Epidemic Sound. Often I'll just listen to a playlist trying to find the right track. It's like, why am I doing that? That's insane. You have to, when you're processing the music and you're evaluating the music, you need to do it in lockstep with whatever it is that you're presenting to the world. So then you can see the symbiosis between the sound and the visual content. That's really, really important.
Yeah. So along those lines, what can brands do to be aware of the role of sound for greater recall and brand building? So
emotion is the key word here, I think. We all know that we don't make decisions logically or rationally. We make decisions emotionally. I'm not telling you anything new here. Everyone knows this. And so you can use music to do that. That's the really most amazing thing about it, because music, again, like we were just talking about a second ago, has the capacity to enter your soul and light up parts of you which other mediums cannot. And so capitalizing upon that is tremendously important. And I think that, again, similar to the last one, in terms of not falling into the pitfall of using just your own biases and opinions, it's worth sometimes sitting with others and allowing them to experience the music and watching what kind of effect it has on them. And particularly if you can find a decent group who are a representation of your audience, then you're really going to get a decent capture on what kind of effect this is having on people, and then you can start to build in all of the systems like the recall and so forth. You know, the TV shows I've known about for decades. They do an incredibly good job of building recall through sound.
Oh, this is kind of along the same lines. So I remember the last time we spoke, you talked a lot about Epidemic sound and people confusing it for a music library. Yeah. And there's so much more than that. It's obviously all the artists that you're repping, all the different one-of-a-kind collaborations that you can do. How can brands better discern moments to lean on music that might already exist versus custom creations?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you might eventually want a custom creation. That might be your destination because you want something which is entirely unique, and that's definitely a use case which we support. However, your journey to it maybe better started by actually finding an artist or finding a texture of sound which is something which is a good representation of your brand, and then you can move into the next stage when you can start to define what your custom version of that is. But even with our artists, you can separate the music by stems and you can create your own version of it. And so there is even a way to get something which is right, but it's one component which isn't quite right. That can help you get to, the stem separation can help you get to that. And there's so often there's a track just waiting there for you, which is actually going to be the embryo or the catalyst, which is going to get you onto that next bit. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit as we were waiting to come in, but with all the genre bending that's going on right now, when we think about Beyonce, and doing country music and stuff like that, well, how do you think brands need to challenge the way that they show up in sports spaces when it comes to music?
I think sports is perhaps one of the most interesting fields of where music has changed. So once upon a time, I feel like, well, I don't feel like, I know, it's evidenced that the big sport, so to speak, would define exactly what their particular sport sounded like. They would give it a soundtrack. So football, definitely in the 90s and the early 2K, soccer.
I was going to say, you mean soccer, right?
I do, yeah. Soccer,
for our U.S. audiences.
Indeed, yeah. Had a very, very, very particular musical footprint. Like it's very kind of Blur, very blokey, very lager type of music, and that was the sound of soccer in the 90s and early 2K. What's really, really, really exciting about now is now that the fans have taken a lot more ownership of content and the way in which we discuss, and the way in which we talk, and the way in which we experience sport. They've re-soundtracked their sports in the way in which feels right to them. And so I think that there's two perhaps new dimensions to soundtracking which is happening in sport, which is really exciting. One being that which comes from the fans, where they define, no, it sounds like this. And then also the athletes themselves, who are now not just people on posters, they are living, breathing people who you can interact with on the internet, and they are now brand ambassadors for their sports, and inevitably they will have a soundtrack which means something to them. And so we're seeing so much more diversity of music in sport, and it's so exciting because it doesn't just mean it sounds different, because music has such a cultural weight. It means that suddenly sports that seemed a little bit out of reach, not for me, I don't resonate with that. That's a different frequency from where I live. Suddenly now that sport can become accessible and interesting to me because it's being presented in such a different way, and that's really powerful.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit of a pivot. We're seeing so many more and more instances where brands are inviting consumers into co-creating with them. Yeah. And when we think about music and sound, do you think this is an era for indie and up-and-coming artists to really shine? And frankly, how with brands?
It definitely is. And again, the one thing which has been really fascinating to watch, I think, over the last perhaps, let's say 10 years, is the way that content's changed. So similar to the previous question, the way that content is produced and the way that content is distributed means that there's a whole new ecosystem of content which didn't exist, 10, 15 years ago. And I guess I'm just talking about YouTube and, other, social platforms. And so what this means is that once upon a time, the only way that a artist could get to make a living would be to sell records, or maybe do some shows. But they need to sell enough records, people hear about them so they can do shows. And so the ecosystem was quite tight. And in order to break into it, it's pretty hard. And you needed a record label to invest in you. And there's so many different points of friction for a new up-and-coming artist to be heard. And then now this massive explosion of content happens, and now sync is this wild opportunity for artists to be heard. And so we see we see incredible stats of some of our artists who are making music which isn't necessarily something which some might call pop or something called mainstream, and these are the kind of signals that a record company would look for. Will you sell records? That's not the way it works anymore. Like now we'll see someone's track on Epidemic Sound suddenly blow up and start to get 1 million streams on Spotify simply because it was the Sidemen, it's a UK creator team, used it in their show, and now suddenly this artist is now a household name amongst the Sidemen's fans, of which there are billions. Yeah. So it's profound. Like the opportunity with sync for artists it's so exciting. I was once upon a time an artist myself, and so
I remember.
Yeah. So thinking of this opportunity for young up and coming artists, it's mind blowing. Like sync is the future for music distribution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we are. Yeah. A couple more questions. Actually, one more. Yeah. We're at Sport Beach, so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about sports and have a little. And so, like in anything sports, a misguided game plan can be a team's downfall. What do you think is a dangerous misconception that brands have, or missteps that's happening related to the role of sound in marketing?
I think perhaps it relates again to some of the other themes that we've discussed, and I think it's probably trend chasing is probably the worst thing a brand can do. This sort of old, outdated misunderstanding that there is a trend happening in music that you need to jump on, and then if you do that, then you'll get likes, you'll get the internet points, and good things will happen to you. That's not really how it works. As we know, like the way in which music consumption now works means that these trends of that used to be around a certain genre just simply don't exist anymore. And so it's very important to think about when you're starting to figure out how to program your brand effectively with sound, that you go way, way, way outside of the scope of something as basic as trends and start to really think a lot more concretely about what it is that you want to wake up in your audience, and what kind of feelings you want to elicit and so forth.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay, after 4 years, I'm finally going to let you put me in the hot seat. You can ask me one question. One.
Not enough, Gina. Not enough.
One. That's all you get.
Yeah.
Go.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so let me see. So we've discussed some really nice, interesting stuff. I really appreciate the questions about sound, and so thanks for those. I think that I think I'd be really intrigued. So you're the Chief Growth Officer at Cole McVoy. You must see a lot of really interesting brands coming in with interesting questions, and you see your team delivering really interesting responses to those questions. What are you seeing like that's being missed? What are you not being asked for?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is everybody's talking about reaching Gen Z. Right. And I think that's great, of course, like they're the future, right? We have to get them into the funnel. What I think is being missed is that I don't think a lot of brands and frankly agencies need to do a better job of actually understanding Gen Z. And frankly, looking at them looking at them for tips and hints of what's to come when we talk about trends and music, et cetera. I think it's really interesting. Like, for example, my daughter who's 15, her and her friends are obsessed with juice. And they're back on juice, and there's these, we want to be on juice cleanses, and it's I want a fun treat, it's juice. And we think about that. I think we're missing the mark on like trends that are going to be coming, and frankly, in the next couple of years even, by not really studying their habits. And I think about that related to this conversation when it comes to music. Like, I mean, and I can't speak to globally, but in the U.S., like country music is back. Yeah. Country music is back though before Beyonce and Shaboozey. It's been back for a while with Gen Z. They've been really into all this sort of all the vibes when it comes to country. And so I do think that brands and agencies can do a better job of really studying these trends, so the 13, 14, 15-year-olds, to get a sense of what's to come.
I love that. I think I'm definitely guilty sometimes of misunderstanding why I'm doing something, why this new behavior is emerging inside of me. I've lost count of the number of times where me and my wife will be like, oh, cool, I guess we're into this now. That's interesting. And then my Gen Z children will say, oh yeah, that was a TikTok thing.
They saw it on TikTok
and I'm like, wait, what? So how did it get to us?
They're cooking because of recipes they see on TikTok. Yeah. Like, it's remarkable.
Completely.
Think about CPG brands and how just studying these kids in TikTok and getting them to use your spice would be amazing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I suppose it's a good reminder that we often get too laser focused on the macro trends, but actually the micro trends which are coming through from a lot of Gen Z are actually the ones to really look out for and start to understand those patterns ourselves. That's great. I love that.
So you asked me a question, but then I was able to kick it back to you. So.
Well, it's a strong answer.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
it's so fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for sitting in here. We got an air-conditioned studio, so
Yeah, thanks,
Rob.
everyone. Yeah, thank you so much,
good.
Gina. It was great.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.